So today we went out and saw Christopher Robin, the movie, and I would say that it is a very nice revisit to childhood and to the issues of being an adult and a mature human being in today's society. So I can highly recommend you go to this movie and see it with your children and see if you can explain it to your children afterward. That would be a very good idea. But anyway, this is a behind the scenes, so I'm going to put that in the chat so that everybody knows. Okay, so this is a behind the scenes video. In other words, what I'm doing is creating a video which I can later edit. This will be unedited, and I will be reading tonight from Aion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self by C.G. Jung, and I'll be reading paragraphs 115 to 117. So, paragraph 115. In the world of Christian ideas, Christ undoubtedly represents the self. As the apotheosis of individuality, the self has the attributes of uniqueness and of occurring once only in time. But since the psychological self is a transcendent concept, expressing the totality of conscious and unconscious contents, it can only be described as antinomial. It can only be described in antinomial terms. That is, the above attributes must be supplemental by their opposites if the transcendent situation is to be characterized correctly. We can do this most simply in the form of a quaternion. We can do this most simply in the form of a quaternion of opposites. And so let me just provide you with this is the figure that Dr. Jung has at this point at the end of paragraph 115. And there is one footnote on this paragraph to the first sentence. So I'll read the first sentence once again. In the world of Christian ideas, Christ undoubtedly represents the self. The footnote reads, "It has been objected that Christ cannot have been a valid symbol of the self, or was only an illusory substitute for it. I can agree with this view only if it refers strictly to the present time, when psychological criticism has become possible, but not if it pretends to judge the pre-psychological age. Christ did not merely symbolize wholeness, but in a psychic phenomenon, he was wholeness. This is proved by the symbolism as well as by the phenomenology of the past, for which, be it noted, evil was a privatio boni. The idea of totality is, at any given time, as total as one is oneself. Who can guarantee that our conception of totality is not equally in need of completion? The mere concept of totality does not by any means posit it." Okay, that's that. Okay, so this paragraph 116. This formula expresses not only the psychological self, but also the dogmatic figure of Christ. As an historical personage, Christ is unitemporal and unique. As God, universal and eternal. Likewise, the self, as the essence of individuality, it is As the essence of individuality, it is unitemporal and unique. As the archetypal symbol, it is a God image and therefore universal and eternal. Now we'll change this image that's on the screen. Okay, this is the image that goes with paragraph 116. And I'm in the middle of paragraph 116. Now, if theology describes Christ as simply good and spiritual, something evil or material or chthonic is bound to arise on the other side to represent the Antichrist. The resultant quaternion of opposites is united on the psychological plane by the fact that the self is not deemed exclusively good and spiritual. Consequently, its shadow turns out to be much less black. A further result is that the opposites of good and spiritual need no longer be separated from the whole. Paragraph 117. This quaternio characterizes the psychological self. Being a totality, it must by definition include the light and dark aspects. In the same way that the self embraces both masculine and feminine and is therefore symbolized by the marriage quaternio. This last is by no means a new discovery, since according to Hippolytus, it was known to the Nascenes. Hence, individuation is a mysterium conjunctionis, the self being experienced as a nuptial union of opposite halves and depicted as a composite whole in men, and depicted as a composite whole in mandalas that are drawn and depicted as a composite whole in mandalas that are drawn spontaneously by patients. Okay, that completes paragraphs 115 to 117 from Aion. I now want to go back and give you Dr. Edinger's commentary on those three paragraphs. And so Dr. Edinger has both of these figures in his chapter. Let's see if I can set them up properly. All right. So Dr. Edinger has them set up side by side for reasons of this video. I'll put them one below the other as they appear in Aion. All right, so at this point I'm reading from the Aion Lectures by Edward F. Edinger, Exploring the Self in C.G. Jung's Aion. And this is the commentary on paragraphs 115 to 117. And when we get to the reference to figure 9 is these two images side by side. This is on page 57 of Dr. Edinger's book, which is published by Inner City Books. Pursuing the idea of the existence of opposites within the God image, or the self, We come next to Jung's theme of the self as a quaternion of opposites. Paragraphs 115 to 117, Figure 9. Figure 9 shows Jung's diagrams of two different crossed pairs of opposites, which are specifically related to the image of Christ. The first relates to the Christ image as a union of God and man, having both human and divine, and both eternal and historic aspects, and both eternal and historical aspects. The caption to these images is, okay, so the caption of the images reads, Figure 9, opposites related to the Christ image. The set on the set above describes the Christ, or the set above describes the Christ of Christian dogma. The set below involves the opposites of good and evil, represented by Christ and Satan. According to the doctrine, Christ was a pre-existent entity. According to the doctrine, Christ was a pre-existent entity. He existed prior to creation on the one hand, and on the other hand, he was born into space and time, into an historical setting, and was therefore a specific historical being. Jung pictures that state of affairs. A figure that has an historical individual existence and yet is also eternal, and that is unique while being universal. His universality is represented symbolically as his being an inner figure that is contained in all humanity. He is the vine, you are the branches. Jung then spells out a second quaternity. This quaternity would apply if one considers that Christ and Satan go to make up a whole. In that case, good and evil constitute one polarity. Spiritual and material constitute the other polarity, because Christ is a spirit but also becomes embodied by incarnation, and so he unites that pair of opposites. Although these diagrams may seem to be only interesting abstractions, they are more than that because they correspond to occasional dream images. One should be alert for dream images that combine opposites in such a fashion. They indicate a self-image. Okay, that's the Edinger commentary on paragraphs 115 to 117 of Aion. I'll stay online for a minute longer. If anyone that is watching has any comments or questions, I'll do my best to answer those now. Otherwise, I will go back to sucking my thumb on a Saturday night. So anyway, okay, it appears not. So I will pass on. I may do another short reading tomorrow morning. If I do, it will be around 11 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. So I'll look forward to seeing any of you then.